Dr. Bergman has a couple of books that are available. The first one, I don't know how many books you've written. We're not selling your 30 books, all right. Slaughter of the Dissidents. This is an in-depth study. Maybe some of you have seen Ben Stein's movie Expelled. Dr. Bergman has done a much more in-depth study of the kind of harassment that academia puts on their scientists, their teachers that have anything to do with the ID movement or creation science. Just came out in 2008. And then also Persuaded by the Evidence, 2000 book. Both of these books are available on the book table. It's just to the left as you're going out the auditorium. Dr. Jerry Bergman is the author of numerous books and papers in professional journals. We're always impressed with this guy's degrees. The way that I count it, you have 9 earned degrees. Okay. I lose track. The ones that are specific to this event tonight, he holds a BS degree in biology, Wayne State University, 1970, a PhD in human biology, Columbia Pacific University, and then a MS in biomedical science from Medical College of Ohio. He is associate professor at Medical University of Ohio and Northwest State Community College in Archbold, Ohio. He teaches biology, he teaches genetics, anthropology, microbiology. What don't you teach there? He is a fellow of the American Scientific Association and a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Science. We are really very pleased to have Dr. Bergman in the house. Let's give a word of prayer before we ask him up to speak. Almighty God, we thank you for this evening, and we thank you that you have granted us an occasion to be here and to broaden our horizons. We do ask for Dr. Bergman that you would put wisdom in his mind and in his mouth tonight for us, that his words might honor and glorify you and bring us greater clarity in this terrible struggle that is involved between evolution and creation. And we pray your mighty power upon him. We ask it through Christ. Amen. Dr. Bergman.
Okay, they asked me to talk about some of the worst problems with Darwinism, and this is kind of like asking if there's a drop of water in the sea. There's plenty of problems with Darwinism. And I can mention briefly my own background. I had a father who was agnostic, atheist. He never really made it very clear, but agnostic might be the kindest term. And my mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and I followed Jehovah's Witnesses and became very disillusioned with them, which you probably can understand, and became not only disillusioned with the Watchtower, but also with religion. I could mention Jehovah's Witnesses feel all religion is of Satan except their own. And so going to the Kingdom Hall, which is what they call their churches, going to the Kingdom Hall, I heard a long litany of negative things about the churches. So I wasn't very inclined to go to any church when I left the Witnesses. Also going to school, of course, I heard a lot of negative stuff about the churches. A lot of negative stuff about the churches. Later on, much of this I found out was simply not true. There's a lot of myths about church history. One common one is that the churches killed a lot of scientists. Well, there's no evidence that the church ever killed any scientists in all history. And this is all Christian churches, especially the Catholic Church, which is blamed for killing Bruno. They didn't. And Galileo is probably the most famous example, and that's another myth as well. There's a lot more behind the story than we commonly believe. So I drifted into atheism, partially because of my study of Darwinism, but I became disillusioned with atheism. Didn't take too long, partially because I realized that atheists seem to spend all their time criticizing Christians and hardly any of their time doing anything positive. And so therefore it became apparent to me that, well, atheism may be true, but a lot of these people are not really very nice people. One can criticize the Christians, but at least they spend a great deal of time helping other people. And I became especially disillusioned with the atheist movement because so much of what they taught in their books and magazines, I knew from my own study, simply was not true. So then I began to explore the existence of God first, and it became apparent that the main reason people became atheists was because of evolution. Evolution is the engine that drives atheism. So I decided to explore whether or not evolution was true. So I took my biology books that I had used in college and listed all of the proofs that they used for evolution. And one by one, I found out through research in the scientific literature that these proofs were invalid. The first one I selected was vestigial organs. Evolutionists teach there's about 180 organs in humans that have no function. If God created us, why in the world would God create all of these useless organs? Seemed to me like a pretty good argument. Well, as I did more and more research in the medical literature, it became very apparent that all of these useless organs were not useless at all. As a matter of fact, most were very, very useful. And then I went on to the other ideas that evolutionists perpetuate, and I realized that the house of cards crumbled. And then when I realized evolution wasn't true, well, there's only two explanations for how we got here. One, we were created by intelligence. Two, we evolved through accumulation of mutations, copying errors. And when I threw one out, that left the other option. So then I began exploring Christianity and other religions as well, and realized that the most scientifically acceptable and historically acceptable explanation for the existence of humans and the world and all we see around us is Christianity. And so I moved into Christianity. And I wrote this book, Persuaded by the Evidence, which is on the back table, because I realized that I was not alone. Many people took the same path that I did. C.S. Lewis is a good example. Made the same route that I did. In fact, many of the people in my book took the same route that I did. So it became very apparent to me that, well, it should be apparent to you, that evidence is critical. And if we think about what Christ did in his ministry, he healed people, that's true, but he also spent much of his time teaching. And he taught using information, giving the people information, knowledge, understanding. And so now in my life, I stress the importance in the church as well as elsewhere. We have got to give people a foundation before they begin that road to Damascus journey. Some people have a Pauline conversion where they're converted on the road to Damascus. Many of us don't. Many of us, the journey is long. Sometimes it's very, very long. And so this issue of evolution became very important to me. And the first section here, I'll give you what I think is one of the most convincing evidences that evolution is not true. It could not be true. It did not occur. And that is the result of science, not religion. Science, not religion. And this presentation I'm giving now, I've given this a number of places, and a number of people have said, yes, I feel this is the most convincing evidence that I have seen that indeed this is the most convincing evidence for creation and against evolution. My theme here is research proves evolution true. Now don't get upset, just let me explain. Okay? The fact is, though, it's going the wrong way. And let me define evolution. Evolution is from molecules to man, or as I prefer to say, from the goo to you by way of the zoo. That's what evolution is. And that's a good way of remembering it, because often when you read books, and I'm reading a book right now by Jerry Coyne, which he says why evolution is true, and as I read the book, I realize that he has no evidence for this evolution from molecules to man. None. What he talks about in the book is microevolution, the small changes, which creationists prefer to call variation within the Genesis kind. That's really all he's talking about. And actually, it's a pretty good book, because he has chapter after chapter about variations within the Genesis kind. But he never gives any evidence for evolution, which scientists define it as from molecules to man. So the problem is not the survival of the fittest, which is a main part of Darwin's theory. Obviously, the more fit are better able to survive. I mean, to me, the best example is it's like saying rich people have money. Well, of course they do. Of course, if you're less fit, you are going to be less likely to survive. That's part of the definition. The problem that evolution has is not the survival of the fittest, but the problem evolution has is unequivocally the arrival of the fittest. They have never been able to come up with an explanation as to where the fittest come from. Darwin has tried, Lamarck has tried, there's lots of theories, but all of them have failed. The most common one utilized today is mutations, and that, as you will see, fails as well. And that is the primary basis of evolution is macromutations or mutations. And
Basically, mutations produce variations. Get this to work. They produce variations that can be selected. So they change the protein coding DNA, they change the DNA, the blueprint for life, and that affects the phenotype. And that's evolution. Ernst Mayr said ultimately all variation is due to mutation. This is Ernst Mayr here. He is one of the most well-known evolutionists in our century. In fact, he just died a short time ago at age 99. Theodosis Dobzhansky, who was a Russian biologist, and he said mutation is the only source of the raw materials and hence of evolution. And Dobzhansky is, again, one of the most eminent evolutionists that have lived during this century. So we're not picking on minor figures. We're picking on the kingpins of the evolutionary movement. So the question is, do we have beneficial mutations? Are they common? Well, I did a literature search, and I found out that from this database, there were 170,000 articles which talked about mutation. 283 in Medline that talk about mutation. Total was about 500,000. Beneficial mutations, only a total of 186. So I reviewed all of these articles, 186, and I found none that were helpful for evolution, and I'll go through some of these. This is one example. This is one of my favorite examples. This is a beneficial mutation, seedless fruit, but it's not very beneficial for the plant. Can't reproduce. It's beneficial for us because we don't have to worry about spitting out seeds, and therefore can be beneficial for humans. Another example is the Belgian blue cattle muscle mutation. And this turns out to be a gold mine, it seemed, for beef farmers. It produces more muscle, and the meat is more tender, and it's low in fat. So it sounds ideal. And this is classified as a beneficial mutation. But that's what they look like. Obviously, they're pretty muscular cows. But unfortunately, there are side effects. In fact, there are so many that they're really not used, as far as I know, not used much today. And a side effect is reduced fertility. And it is beneficial for farmers and consumers, but the result is information loss. And basically, it has a 11-base deletion in an encoding region. So there are breaks when the muscle develops. And when the muscle develops to a certain point, it stops. Well, the breaks are broken in these cows. As a result, the muscle just keeps right on developing. And finally, other factors slow it down. Another example is in 1791, Seth Wright discovered a male lamb in his flock that had short bent legs. And the advantage, you might wonder what advantage this would be, but the advantage is thank you very much. It couldn't jump high fences. Sheep, as you may know, tend to be very independent creatures. They do their own thing and they wander away from the herd. Some animals, like dogs, stick together, but sheep don't. And therefore, a herder, a chief concern is to try to keep track of the sheep, right? And therefore, if they have short legs, you don't need to have high fences. Therefore, you can save a lot of time and money. So, beneficial mutation, well, Darwin thought so. In fact, Darwin talked about this mutation, and that's what they look like. The middle one is the Ancon sheep, right here. See the short legs? And there's a normal sheep. Well, it turns out, and Darwin, by the way, thought, and others thought, that this single mutation produces a whole new breed. They call this a new breed of sheep. And so many people thought we get one mutation, we get a whole new species. Just one mutation. So a number of people thought this proves evolution. Well, it turns out this is actually a deformity which is lethal. It's called achondroplasia. And humans also have the same deformity, and there is a man who happens to be an actor who also is achondroplasiac. Not a very nice disease to end up with. You end up with a lot of health problems. Awful lot of health problems. And there's another example of a mutation. Extra arm, that would certainly be useful. Just think of all you could do if you had an extra arm. Unfortunately, though, this did not turn out to be very helpful because in this case they had to remove both arms because neither were functional. Another example is sheep, a couple extra legs. Well, that's certainly not beneficial. And that's an example of what we think of more often when we think of a mutation. You can see that this child is horribly deformed. And if you're in the medical field, you realize that when you talk about mutations, you're virtually always talking about something that is negative. Another example, this child, a mutation caused a deformity in the entire lower half of his body. And this is an example of a real beneficial mutation, but I'll try to explain how it is not as helpful as evolutionists like to think. This is a ribosome, which is part of the cell, which is important in converting the DNA code into protein. So it's necessary for the cell to grow and reproduce and repair itself. And this is streptomycin. Streptomycin, an antibiotic, fits right in here, and when it fits in here, it turns the ribosome off. The bacteria cannot produce new protein, can't repair damaged protein, and it dies. Big problem for the bacteria. Well, if you get damage here, and you can see that little damage right there, you get damage there, streptomycin doesn't fit in, therefore this bacteria is resistant to this antibiotic. So it is for the bacteria a beneficial mutation, but it's not evolving anywhere. It's still a bacteria, number one. And number two, it may not shock you, but this guy, when faced with this guy, is at a clear disadvantage. If you send a patient home from the hospital, they get a lot of streptomycin-resistant bacteria in the hospital. When they go home, normal bacteria outcompete them and are killed. Because this bacteria has a handicap because of this damage. The damage can be beneficial when you're in an environment which has a lot of streptomycin. But if you're in a streptomycin-free environment, this is not beneficial. And they call this the fitness cost. And it's well known in bacteriology that most of these beneficial mutations are only beneficial in an antibiotic environment, and they also carry a fitness cost, which means in the wild they are not beneficial. Another example, this is one of my favorite. This right here is the CD4 receptor and the CCR5 receptor, and this right here is an HIV virus. The HIV virus, to get inside the cell, must dock with both of these receptors. When it does so, it can get inside the cell. If this receptor is damaged, which in this case it is, there it is, it's damaged, so it's non-functional because of mutation, the whole thing was not produced, therefore it does not move into the membrane of the cell, therefore it does not exist in the membrane of the cell, therefore HIV cannot bind, and as a result, because HIV doesn't bind, the person with these cells is HIV resistant. So the person is clearly has an advantage in catching, or resisting in this case, AIDS. But this is not a result of evolution, this is a result of damage of something. Something is broken. Okay, and I found, by the way, they were all fit this category pretty much. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible for there to be a beneficial mutation that's beneficial in all situations. But even example of blue eyes, and blue eyes, we're pretty sure now, is a result of a mutation. So if you have blue eyes, you have inherited a mutation that went way, way, way back. It's a result of a mutation. And I guess a lot of us think people with blue eyes are beautiful, right? Blue-eyed blonde, is that what they say? So blue eyes can be beneficial. But on the other hand, depending upon how light your eyes are, you have a clear handicap when you're exposed to bright lights. I have a very hard time with bright lights because I have blue eyes. Because I don't have the protection that I need. The natural color of your iris diaphragm is blue. And people with brown eyes have blue eyes, and on top of that, they have the brown pigment. People who have blue eyes like everybody else, but they lack the brown pigment because there's a mutation that prevents adding the brown pigment on top of the iris diaphragm, and as a result, they take in too much light. As a result, they have a hard time in very bright areas. Now, some people get used to it. They can adjust to it. But as you may expect, people with blue eyes are more apt to develop certain eye diseases because too much light goes into the eye, especially if they spend a lot of time outdoors. Okay, since the vast majority, and this is well agreed upon in the scientific community, if 99.99% of mutations are harmful or lethal or near neutral, okay, and if the number of mutations that separate two species is 2,000, we need 2,000 consecutive beneficial mutations to go from species A, if I don't lose this thing here, to species B without a lethal or harmful mutation shutting down progression. So what does that mean? That means in order to evolve a new species, remember 99.99% of all mutations are harmful. So you get one harmful mutation, you go backwards. So how many mutations is it going to get to evolve a new species? Well, one estimate is about 20 million mutations before you evolve a new species. Now, there are a lot of things you can do to play with numbers, but it's a problem, and evolutionists recognize this. They estimate over 100,000 different proteins are used in humans, and all these are produced by the 23,000 genes that we have. So how many mutations is it going to take to produce these 100,000 different proteins? Well, the number becomes mind-boggling, especially considering for each step forward, we take 999 backwards. Best illustration I've heard of this, it's like making money on a store by losing on every sale, but making up because of high volume. Now, you have to think about that for a minute. But if you lose money on every sale, high volume is not going to solve your problem. It's not going to solve your problem. Okay, de-evolution. Most mutations we now know are near neutral, and that means they accumulate. And a major cause of aging is the accumulation of near neutral mutations. A near neutral mutation means that one mutation is not going to cause a problem. 4 or 5 is not going to cause a problem. Several hundred is not going to cause a problem. As a result, they accumulate as we get older, and as a result, when we're 60, 70, 80, or 90, we've accumulated so many near neutral mutations that, as a result, we have what we call aging, which means that nothing works as well. You don't see as well, you don't hear as well, you don't walk as well, you don't talk as well, you don't heal as well. Nothing works as well because every structure accumulates mutations. Now, people age, but also we know now that species age. In fact, many people feel that's a major cause of extinction. As the species is around for longer and longer periods of time, the species accumulates more and more mutations. The species ages, and eventually the species go extinct. It dies, just like people accumulate mutations and die. So the result is, in my biochemistry book, expresses it probably better than I ever could. It says that each child that is born has slightly more negative, harmful mutations than his or her parents. That means you have more harmful mutations than your parents. Your children will have more than you. Their children will have more than you. So what's going to happen? And this is standard part of biochemistry. It's in very clear black and white in my biochemistry book that we use. So what's going to happen? After a while, the species is going to age, and after a while, it's going to lead to the extinction of the species. Is that happening with us? Yes, it is. And so we are evolving, but we are going the wrong way. We are accumulating genetic damage, and as generation goes by, and generation again, over and over, eventually we're going to become extinct as a species. Now, medicine is very aware of this, and they're fighting very hard to reduce the problem by medical treatments, medical techniques, and so on. So they're very aware of this. But many doctors don't think, well, what does this mean, that we're accumulating mutations? Well, it should be pretty clear. It means what they call mutational meltdown. And eventually, when we have too many mutations, we're going to end up becoming extinct if we're around here long enough. Another major problem is what they call pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is the idea that your entire body is highly interconnected. So interconnected that when one gene becomes damaged, all too often, and I'll just show you a picture. This is a biochemistry chart which shows the interconnectedness of your biochemical system. Now, I only could show a small part of this. Sorry, I just didn't have room on the screen. But you can see here, if you block any area here, any one area here, I can get this thing to work here. Maybe I'll try another one in a few minutes. But if you get any area it doesn't work, that's damaged, it's going to affect everything downstream. Think about a circuit for a computer. If you take a pair of scissors and cut a wire on a computer, probably the whole thing is going to fail, because the interconnectedness is enormous. A better example of that, which is more common to you, is that every drug has a side effect. Why? Every drug has, and there is no drug that doesn't have a side effect. Everyone has a side effect. And when you take a drug, you read the sheet they give you with it, and it says, contraindications or side effects or something along that line. And if you read it, it causes headaches and constipation and pain and sinus problems and you go insane and death. It lists all these things. And you wonder how they can sell it. Well, because they know every drug causes side effects. Why does every drug cause side effects? Because most drugs act by interfering with these biochemical pathways. And when you block one pathway, you affect everything downstream. And a good example is sleeping pills help you sleep. They make you tired. And most over-the-counter sleeping pills are antihistamines. Okay? Antihistamines block the histamine biochemical pathway so that you have less histamines, and histamines, besides affecting your wake-sleep cycle, also affect your ability to produce mucus. And so, sleeping pills help you sleep when you use antihistamine type, which most of them are. They help you sleep, but they make your mouth dry. Okay? Because they affect the mucus production. So if you have a cold, you take antihistamines to make your mucous membranes dry. And the side effect is what? It makes you drowsy. Okay, now there are other side effects as well, but those are the most common ones. And that's because pleiotropy shows us, we know now, that the entire biochemical system is interconnected. So if you have a mutation, clearly that produces an advantage, you can almost guarantee it's going to produce problems. Antihistamines, if you want to go to sleep, produces a clear advantage. It also produces disadvantages. And the same thing we find with this biochemical pathway. If something is beneficial, if you have a beneficial mutation, it's a high likelihood it's going to cause other negative things. Because the whole system is interconnected. It all works together. And that's a major problem with building life by producing mutations. And there you can see is a small part of the chart, which is a lot easier to see because you can see the different fructose and dextrose fructose and beta fructose and 1 kinase and mannose and glucose 6 phosphatase and so on. See lots of examples.